The night settles gently over the Nile Valley. The last warmth of the day still lingers inside the mud brick walls, while outside, a quiet breeze drifts slowly across the river. Palm leaves move only a little. Reeds along the riverbank whisper softly as the water continues its endless journey through the ancient land. The stars appear one by one. They have watched over Egypt for countless generations, shining above farmers returning from their fields, fishermen tying their boats to wooden posts, bakers preparing tomorrow's bread, and craftsmen putting away the tools that have served them since sunrise. Tonight they also shine above another kind of worker. A tomb painter. He is not a king. He owns no palace. His name may never be carved into stone for future generations to read. Yet every careful brush stroke he leaves behind will quietly survive inside cool chambers hidden beneath desert hills, protected from sunlight for centuries beyond his own lifetime. For now, however, none of that matters. He is simply another tired man preparing for sleep after a long day's work. His home stands among many others at the edge of a workers' village not far from the western desert, where the setting sun disappears each evening behind pale limestone cliffs. The house is modest, built from thick mud bricks shaped by careful hands many years before. The walls still hold a little warmth from the afternoon, but the evening breeze drifting through the doorway slowly carries that warmth away. Inside, the room is simple. A woven reed mat rests upon the packed earth floor. Several clay jars stand quietly against the coolest wall. A small wooden stool supports a shallow oil lamp whose flame flickers gently whenever the breeze wanders through the house. Bundles of flax hang neatly from wooden pegs. A few brushes made from split reeds rest beside a smooth limestone palette still carrying faint traces of red and yellow pigment from the day's work. The painter notices them as he enters. He smiles softly. Tomorrow they will return with him. They always do. His wife has already finished baking the evening bread. The warm smell fills the room. Beside the bread sits a small bowl of lentils seasoned with herbs gathered earlier beside an irrigation canal. There are onions, a few dates, and cool water resting inside a clay jar whose surface still feels pleasantly cool beneath the hand. The family eats slowly. No one rushes. The children speak quietly about small things. One tells a story about seeing an ibis near the river. Another proudly shows a little figure shaped from damp clay earlier in the day. Their father listens more than he speaks. His shoulders feel heavy. Not from lifting stone. Not from carrying timber. His work asks something different from the body. It asks for patience. It asks for steady hands. It asks for long hours sitting upon wooden stools inside cool stone chambers where every line must remain calm and true. After supper he washes his hands. Tiny flecks of blue and green still cling beneath his fingernails. Some pigments are stubborn. They stay long after the work is finished. His youngest daughter notices. She gently touches one blue mark upon his finger. "Did you paint the sky today?" she asks. He chuckles quietly. "No." "What did you paint?" "A lotus flower." She smiles. Tomorrow she will probably ask the same question again. Sometimes the answer is birds. Sometimes boats. Sometimes fields of grain. Sometimes servants carrying baskets. Sometimes graceful figures walking toward eternity. Every day is a little different. Yet every day feels peaceful. Soon the children grow sleepy. The family climbs onto the flat roof where woven sleeping mats have already been spread beneath the stars. The night air feels wonderfully cool after the warmth trapped inside the limestone hills all afternoon. The painter lies quietly beside his family. He watches the stars. His eyes slowly follow the familiar patterns overhead. Tomorrow he will once again enter darkness while the world outside grows bright. He often thinks this is a curious way to spend a life. Most people greet the sunrise beneath open skies. He greets it by walking into a mountain. Long before daylight reaches its brightest hour, he will disappear into cool corridors carved deep inside the desert cliffs. There, oil lamps will replace sunlight. Silence will replace birdsong. Stone walls will become his horizon. Yet somehow he has never found that life lonely. The chambers possess their own quiet beauty. The air inside remains still. Every sound echoes gently. Even the scratch of a brush against smooth plaster becomes part of the day's peaceful rhythm. Eventually sleep arrives. The village grows silent. Only distant frogs along the Nile and the whisper of the breeze remain awake. Hours pass unnoticed. The stars slowly drift across the sky. Then, little by little, darkness begins to soften. Far to the east, beyond the green ribbon of the Nile, the horizon brightens with the faintest silver light. Another day is beginning. The painter wakes before the sun. He sits quietly for a moment while the rest of the family still sleeps. These few moments belong only to him. The air is fresh. The world remains almost perfectly still. He drinks from the clay water jar. The water is cool. He washes his face. The coolness chases away the last traces of sleep. Soon the smell of fresh bread rises once more from nearby homes. Across the village, other workers are waking. Stone cutters, carpenters, plaster makers, scribes, laborers. Everyone follows a familiar rhythm. Doors open quietly. Sandals touch dusty streets. Clay jars are lifted onto shoulders. Donkeys begin their slow walk toward another day's work. The painter gathers his tools carefully. Nothing is thrown into a basket without thought. Each brush is wrapped in linen. Pigments rest inside small pottery containers. His limestone palette fits neatly beside them. A smooth polishing stone. A length of measuring cord. Several reed pens for sketching. Everything has its place. His oldest son watches from the doorway. One day the boy may choose another trade. Or perhaps he will become a painter as well. For now he simply enjoys watching his father prepare. There is always so much to carry, the boy says. His father smiles. The painting is the easy part. The boy laughs softly. They step outside together. Morning has arrived. The village glows beneath gentle golden light. Women sweep courtyards. Bread cools upon woven baskets. Smoke rises lazily from clay ovens. A donkey waits patiently beside a wooden cart loaded with limestone blocks. Somewhere nearby, a potter shapes fresh clay before the heat grows stronger. The painter walks slowly toward the western cliffs. The road is familiar. His sandals have followed it nearly every morning for many years. Dust rises gently beneath each step. Birds fly low across the fields beside the Nile. Farmers are already beginning their work while the air remains cool. Water glitters inside irrigation canals. The painter pauses briefly beside the river. Not because he must. Because he enjoys these few quiet moments. The river reminds him that not every part of Egypt is dry stone and desert sand. He watches fishermen preparing their boats. Children carry water jars toward nearby homes. Palm trees reflect softly upon calm water. Everything moves without hurry. He fills a small cup. Drinks once more. Then continues westward. Gradually the green fields disappear behind him. The earth becomes drier. Palm trees grow fewer. The limestone cliffs rise ahead, glowing pale beneath the growing sunlight. These cliffs are unlike any other place. From a distance they appear silent, almost empty. Yet inside them lies another world. Long corridors, hidden rooms, quiet chambers, walls waiting patiently for careful hands. Other workers gather near the entrance. Some carry baskets of plaster. Others bring fresh pigments ground from minerals collected far away. One man carries jars of clean water. Another arrives with bundles of fresh reed brushes. They greet one another quietly. No one raises their voice. The desert itself encourages calm speech. Together they walk into the mountain. The bright morning fades behind them. Sunlight becomes a narrow ribbon at the entrance. Then even that disappears. The air changes immediately. Outside the desert will become hot before long. Inside the tomb the stone remains cool. Not cold. Simply peaceful. The smell is different here. Dry limestone. Fresh plaster. Oil lamps. Mineral pigments. A faint trace of smoke lingering near the ceiling from yesterday's work. The chambers echo softly. Footsteps sound gentle against the stone floor. One worker begins lighting oil lamps fixed upon simple wooden stands. Small golden flames awaken one by one. Their light dances across unfinished walls. The painter places his basket carefully upon the floor. He does not begin immediately. First he sits quietly. He studies yesterday's work. A row of graceful figures carrying offerings stretches across one wall. Each face calm. Each movement gentle. The colors remain soft beneath the flickering lamps. He smiles. There is still much to do. He unwraps his brushes. Mixes fresh pigment with careful drops of water. The colors slowly awaken inside shallow stone bowls. Red made from ochre. Yellow from earth. White from limestone. Black from soot. Blue prepared from precious minerals. Green ground patiently until smooth. Nothing is hurried. Good painting begins long before the first brush touches the wall. The plaster itself must be ready. Too wet and the color spreads. Too dry and it refuses to settle. The painter gently touches the wall with the back of one finger. Perfect. He breathes slowly. Raises the brush. And in the quiet heart of the mountain, while the bright Egyptian morning continues outside beneath the warm desert sun, the first careful stroke of another peaceful day appears upon the ancient stone. The brush moved so slowly that, from across the chamber, it almost seemed perfectly still. Only the painter himself could feel its gentle progress. The fine reed fibers carried a small amount of red pigment across the smooth plaster, leaving behind a clean, steady line no wider than the stem of a young reed growing beside the Nile. He did not press hard. There was no need. The wall accepted the color with quiet patience. The chamber remained peaceful. Several oil lamps rested upon simple stone ledges, their small flames glowing softly against the pale limestone. Their light never reached every corner. Some places remained in gentle shadow, while others flickered with warm gold whenever the flame danced in the still air. The painter had grown used to this light. Outside, the sun changed from hour to hour. Inside the tomb, the world hardly changed at all. Morning and afternoon felt almost the same. Only the workers themselves carried time with them. Nearby, another painter prepared blue pigment inside a shallow stone bowl. He used a smooth grinding stone to crush tiny pieces of mineral into finer and finer powder. The motion was slow and steady. Round and round the stone traveled, making only the faintest scraping sound. The noise blended with everything else. The soft movement of brushes. Quiet footsteps. The gentle crackle of lamp flames. Someone shifting a wooden stool across the floor. The distant echo of voices farther down another corridor. Nothing disturbed the silence. It was the kind of silence that allowed careful work. The master painter looked toward his younger apprentice. The boy had only recently begun learning the trade. His hands were still uncertain. Sometimes his lines wandered slightly. Sometimes he mixed too much water into the paint. But he was patient. Patience mattered more than speed. The older painter walked toward him without speaking. He watched quietly for a few moments. The apprentice was painting the edge of a lotus leaf. His hand trembled only a little. The master smiled kindly. Instead of correcting the line himself, he simply rested one finger lightly against the boy's wrist. The trembling stopped. The brush became steadier. "There," he whispered. The apprentice nodded. He finished the leaf without another mistake. No long lesson followed. Some things could only be learned through calm repetition. Across the chamber, two plaster workers examined another wall that would soon be ready for painting. One gently ran his palm across the surface. Even in the dim light, his experienced fingers noticed places too rough for fine artwork. He mixed another small amount of wet plaster. Using a flat wooden tool, he spread it carefully across tiny imperfections. When he finished, the wall looked almost unchanged. Yet the painter would notice the difference immediately. A smooth wall welcomed gentle brush strokes. A rough wall interrupted them. The painters and plaster workers understood one another without many words. Each depended upon the other's careful hands. Farther inside the tomb, a scribe sat upon a low wooden stool with a sheet of fresh papyrus resting across his lap. His reed pen moved quietly through black ink. He copied short notes describing which sections had been completed and which colors would be needed tomorrow. His writing remained neat despite the dim light. Years of practice allowed him to work almost without hesitation. Occasionally he paused to stretch his fingers. Then he returned to the page. Even records deserved careful attention. Nothing inside the tomb was considered unimportant. Time passed almost unnoticed. The painter completed one lotus flower. Then another. Each petal curved gently outward. Each stem flowed naturally toward the water below. He had painted hundreds of flowers during his lifetime. Still, he never rushed them. No two flowers growing beside the Nile looked exactly alike. Neither should those upon the wall. For a moment he rested his brush. He leaned back slightly upon his stool. His shoulders welcomed the pause. Painting required stillness. Holding the same careful position for long hours often tired the body in quiet ways. The hands became stiff. The neck ached. The knees longed to stretch. He stood slowly. Walked a few peaceful steps through the chamber. Near one lamp rested a clay jar filled with cool water. Its surface remained pleasantly cool inside the stone chamber. He poured a small drink into a simple cup. The water tasted fresh. He drank without hurry. Nearby, one of the stonecutters smiled. "The flowers are growing." The painter laughed softly. "They grow one brush stroke at a time." The stonecutter nodded. "So do mountains." Both men smiled. There was comfort in slow work. Outside the tomb, the morning sun had climbed higher above the western cliffs. Its warmth spread steadily across the desert. The limestone reflected bright light toward the cloudless sky. Far below, green fields stretched beside the Nile, where farmers guided water through narrow canals. Donkeys carried baskets between villages. Women baked bread inside warm clay ovens. Fishermen pulled quiet nets through calm water. Life continued beneath the open sky. Inside the mountain, however, the workers felt only cool stone surrounding them. Sometimes they almost forgot how bright the day had become. One young laborer entered carrying fresh oil for the lamps. He moved carefully between wooden stools and baskets of pigments. Each lamp received only enough oil to continue burning steadily. Too much wasted precious supplies. Too little allowed the flame to weaken. He had learned exactly how much each lamp required. When he finished, the chamber glowed warmly once more. The painter noticed the steadier light. Colors became easier to judge. He returned to the wall. This time he began outlining the feathers of a graceful water bird standing beside tall reeds. The bird appeared calm. Its neck curved gently. Its long legs rested in shallow water painted with delicate blue lines. Creating feathers demanded extraordinary patience. One careful stroke. Then another. Hundreds of tiny lines slowly formed the soft texture of wings. The apprentice watched with admiration. "How long did it take you to learn?" The master continued painting for several moments before answering. "I am still learning." The boy looked surprised. "But you know everything." The older man smiled without looking away from the wall. "The wall always teaches another lesson." The apprentice thought quietly about those words. Perhaps one day he would understand them fully. At midday, the workers gathered near the entrance where fresh air drifted inside. Sunlight stopped just beyond the stone doorway, creating a bright frame around the desert outside. Most preferred remaining within the cool shade rather than sitting beneath the hot sun. They shared simple meals. Fresh bread wrapped in linen. Onions. Dates. A little dried fish. Some lentils prepared before dawn. Clay jars of cool water rested nearby. No one hurried through the meal. Conversations remained soft. One worker spoke about his small vegetable garden beside the river. Another wondered whether the barley harvest would begin next week. Someone else described watching his youngest daughter chase butterflies through a field of flax. The painter listened quietly. He enjoyed hearing about ordinary things. The simple stories somehow belonged inside the tomb as much as the paintings themselves. Many of the scenes covering these walls showed people baking bread, tending gardens, gathering fish, carrying water, harvesting grain, and preparing meals. Life itself was worthy of careful painting. After resting, the workers slowly returned to their tasks. The lamps still glowed steadily. The cool chamber welcomed them once again. The painter dipped his brush into green pigment. Today he would finish the marsh plants surrounding the birds. Each stem reached upward with quiet elegance. He remembered walking beside the Nile only yesterday morning. Watching reeds move gently in the breeze. Listening to frogs hidden among the tall grasses. Seeing dragonflies resting upon slender leaves. Those peaceful memories guided his hand. He painted not only what he saw. He painted what he remembered feeling. The calm. The stillness. The quiet rhythm of the river. Hours slipped gently past. The wall slowly became more alive. Not through movement, but through careful detail. A fisherman stood patiently inside a small papyrus boat. A cluster of lotus blossoms floated upon calm water. Tiny fish swam beneath delicate ripples. Geese rested near the riverbank. Everything appeared peaceful. Everything belonged together. As the afternoon slowly deepened outside, the chamber remained wrapped in its gentle silence. The painter stepped back once more to study the growing scene. He noticed one stem leaning slightly too far. Without frustration, he mixed fresh color and quietly corrected it. Good work was rarely finished the first time. Patience allowed every small imperfection to find its proper place. Far beyond the stone walls, warm desert winds crossed the cliffs, carrying fine sand across ancient paths leading back toward the Nile. Evening still lay many hours away. But inside the cool heart of the mountain, where oil lamps flickered against smooth limestone and careful hands continued their timeless work, another peaceful day unfolded, one quiet brush stroke at a time. The afternoon settled gently around the limestone cliffs, though inside the tomb there was little sign that the sun had crossed farther toward the western sky. The cool chambers held the same quiet stillness they had welcomed since the workers arrived before dawn. The stone seemed to keep its own measure of time, untouched by the changing light outside. The painter rested his brush across the edge of a shallow stone bowl. He looked carefully at the wall before him. A line of lotus flowers now stretched gracefully along the lower part of the scene. Their broad leaves floated upon painted water that would never ripple and never dry beneath the desert sun. Nearby, a fisherman stood quietly in his narrow papyrus boat, holding a simple net over calm blue water. Everything appeared peaceful. That was exactly how the painter wanted it to feel. He believed a wall should invite calm. His master had once told him, many years earlier, that a hurried hand could always be seen, even after many generations. Stone remembers, the old master had said softly. The young apprentice beside him had not yet heard that lesson. He was carefully mixing yellow ochre inside a small pottery cup. He added a little too much water. The color became thinner than it should have been. The master painter noticed immediately. He walked over without the slightest sign of annoyance. He knelt beside the boy. Taking another pinch of finely ground pigment, he stirred it gently into the mixture with a small wooden stick. The yellow deepened. "There," he whispered. The apprentice watched closely. "You can always add water." The older man smiled. "But it takes patience to bring the color back." The apprentice nodded. He remembered every small lesson. None of them were spoken loudly. The tomb itself seemed to encourage quiet voices. Farther down the corridor, another group of painters worked upon the ceiling. Simple wooden scaffolding stood beneath the smooth stone above. The men climbed carefully, carrying only the brushes and pigments they needed. One painted small golden stars across a rich blue background. Another filled delicate borders with repeating patterns of flowers and leaves. Working overhead required steady shoulders and patient arms. Every few minutes one of them paused. He stretched his fingers, rolled his neck gently, then returned to the careful rhythm of the brush. No one hurried. The ceiling would still be waiting tomorrow. Nearby, a stone carver quietly deepened the outline of carved symbols upon another wall. His copper chisel tapped gently against limestone. Tap. Pause. Tap. Pause. The sound echoed softly through the chamber. The painter had heard that rhythm nearly every working day of his life. It had become strangely comforting. Some people found peace beside flowing water. Others found it beneath rustling palm trees. For him, there was also peace in the slow music of craftsmen at work. He dipped his brush into black pigment. Now came the delicate outlines. Color gave life. But careful lines gave shape. Without them, figures appeared unfinished. The brush moved with remarkable confidence. His hand no longer thought about each movement. Years of practice had allowed the work to become almost like breathing. He traced the curve of a woman's arm carrying a basket of bread. He outlined the feathers of a duck resting among papyrus reeds. He refined the edge of a woven basket overflowing with figs. Each object belonged to ordinary life. He had painted kings before. He had painted nobles. Yet somehow he found greater comfort painting simple things. A loaf of bread. A fishing net. A water jar. A field of grain. Perhaps it was because those things surrounded him every day. They reminded him of home. While his brush moved, his thoughts wandered quietly to his own village. By now his wife would likely be sweeping the courtyard beneath the soft afternoon shade. His youngest daughter might be helping her grandmother grind grain between smooth stones. His son could be watching carpenters repair a wooden cart near the village entrance. The smell of bread would once again drip through narrow streets. Children would be resting during the hottest part of the day. Everything followed familiar rhythms. Life rarely surprised anyone. There was comfort in that. The apprentice interrupted his thoughts. "Master." "Yes." "Did your father paint?" The older man smiled. "No." "What did he do?" "He made clay jars." The apprentice looked thoughtful. "So you grew up with potters?" "I did." "Were you happy?" The painter laughed quietly. "I spent my childhood covered in clay." The boy smiled. "Now you are covered in paint." "That is true." For a few moments neither spoke again. The chamber returned to its peaceful silence. The apprentice imagined rows of clay jars drying beneath the Egyptian sun. He wondered how someone who grew up shaping clay had come to love painting stone. Eventually curiosity won. "Why did you become a painter?" The older man rested his brush. He considered the question carefully. "I liked watching colors." The apprentice waited. "When I was small, I watched my mother dye linen. Blue. Red. Yellow. I could sit for hours watching the colors spread through cloth." He smiled gently. "Perhaps I never stopped watching." The boy looked toward the bowls of pigment arranged neatly upon the floor. He suddenly understood them differently. They were not simply materials. They were colors waiting patiently to become something beautiful. Near the entrance, a fresh breeze drifted inside the tomb. It carried the faint smell of warm desert sand. The workers welcomed it. Though the chambers remained cool, every gentle movement of air felt pleasant. The flames upon the oil lamps flickered for only a moment before growing steady once more. Outside, a small group of laborers carried baskets of limestone chips away from another unfinished passage. Their footsteps stirred pale dust that sparkled briefly in the sunlight. The heat beyond the entrance had grown strong. The painter glanced toward the bright opening. It almost seemed another world. Brilliant sunlight. Endless blue sky. The distant green ribbon of the Nile. Then he looked back toward the quiet walls surrounding him. Cool stone. Golden lamplight. Gentle silence. He appreciated both places. Each belonged to his life. One gave him home. The other gave him purpose. As afternoon slowly continued, another worker entered carrying fresh plaster prepared only a short while earlier. Its smooth white surface looked almost like thick cream. The plasterer carefully spread it across a new section of wall. Long wooden tools smoothed every inch. The surface became perfectly even. When finished, the wall almost glowed beneath the lamplight. The painter walked over. He did not touch it immediately. Instead he watched. Fresh plaster changed slowly as it settled. Knowing the right moment to paint required experience. Too early, and the brush disturbed the surface. Too late, and the pigment would not settle as beautifully. He had learned to wait. Waiting, he often thought, was part of painting. Just as important as drawing. Across another chamber, an elderly painter with silver beginning to show in his hair quietly hummed a melody almost too soft to hear. No words. Only a gentle tune. The sound drifted through the corridors like a distant breeze. No one asked him to stop. The quiet melody somehow belonged among the lamps and limestone. It never disturbed the peace. Instead, it seemed to keep everyone's hands moving with calm patience. The afternoon wore on. Brushes continued their careful dance across plaster. Stone bowls slowly emptied of pigment. Water jars grew lighter as workers paused now and then for cool drinks. The painter washed one brush thoroughly before selecting another with finer reed fibers. This smaller brush would allow him to paint delicate strands of hair upon one graceful figure standing beside a flowering tree. Each strand required only the lightest touch. His breathing slowed naturally. Steady breath. Steady hand. Steady line. Nearby, the apprentice watched once again. He noticed something he had never realized before. The master seemed to breathe at the same pace as his brush. Nothing hurried either one. Perhaps, the apprentice thought, painting was not simply about the hand. Perhaps the whole body learned together. As the shadows outside the tomb entrance slowly lengthened across the desert floor, the workers inside continued their quiet labor, surrounded by cool stone, warm lamplight, and the comforting rhythm of patient craftsmanship. Every careful line, every softly mixed color, every peaceful pause became another small part of a story that would remain sleeping within these silent chambers for thousands of years, long after the footsteps of the painters themselves had faded gently into the timeless sands of Egypt. The quiet work continued without hurry. Inside the limestone chambers, time seemed to drift as gently as the slow current of the Nile far below the western cliffs. The painters rarely spoke unless there was something useful to say. Most of the day passed with only the soft sound of brushes touching plaster, the faint scrape of grinding stones, and the gentle crackle of oil lamps burning steadily along the walls. The master painter stepped back once again. He had learned long ago that painting was not only done close to the wall. Sometimes the most important work happened several steps away. From nearby, every tiny brush stroke demanded attention. From farther back, the whole picture began to breathe. He folded his arms quietly. The painted marsh now stretched across almost the entire wall. Tall papyrus reeds rose toward the painted sky. Lotus blossoms floated peacefully upon calm blue water. White birds stood silently among green stems. Small fish glided beneath the surface. Everything rested together in perfect balance. Nothing called attention to itself. Nothing appeared hurried. It reminded him of an early morning beside the Nile before the villages awakened. That was exactly the feeling he hoped to capture. The apprentice carried another small bowl of green pigment toward him. "I mixed this one slowly," the boy said. The master accepted the bowl. He dipped the tip of his brush into the color. It spread smoothly. He smiled. "You remembered." The apprentice nodded proudly. "I did not rush. Neither should the color." The boy laughed softly. Around them, the chamber remained wonderfully cool. Outside, the afternoon sun covered the cliffs with bright white light, but deep within the mountain the stone protected every worker from the heat. The cool air carried a faint scent of damp plaster, dry limestone, and burning olive oil from the lamps. It was a smell the painter had known for most of his life. Whenever he noticed it, he immediately felt ready to work. Some people remembered home through the smell of baking bread. Others through fresh river water or fields after the annual flood. For him, the quiet fragrance of pigment and limestone had become another kind of home. Not far away, one of the older craftsmen carefully sharpened a reed brush. He used a small copper knife with slow, precise movements. The tip needed to be just right. Too broad, and delicate lines became clumsy. Too narrow, and the brush could not hold enough pigment. He tested the point upon a small piece of smooth limestone kept for practice. One graceful line appeared. Then another. Satisfied, he placed the brush beside several others arranged neatly upon folded linen. Nothing in the workshop was left scattered across the floor. Every tool had its own place. Order made the day feel peaceful. Searching for a missing brush while the lamp flickered nearby only interrupted quiet concentration. The painter had learned that lesson many years before. His first master insisted that every evening ended the same way. Brushes were washed. Pigments were covered. Stone palettes were wiped clean. Wooden stools returned to their places. Water jars were sealed. At first, the young painter had wondered why such careful tidying mattered. Years later he understood. Tomorrow's peaceful work always began with yesterday's careful ending. Far down another passage, a group of plaster workers finished smoothing a fresh section of wall. Their broad wooden tools glided across the wet surface with practiced confidence. One worker checked every corner using the flat palm of his hand. His fingertips could feel tiny imperfections invisible beneath the lamp's gentle light. Whenever he found a rough place, he quietly corrected it. No complaint. No frustration. Only patience. The painters appreciated such care. A smooth wall welcomed the brush like calm water welcomes a small boat. Nearby, a scribe slowly unrolled a fresh sheet of papyrus. His task today was not to paint but to observe. He watched the growing artwork carefully. Every completed section would later be recorded among the workshop's notes. He dipped his reed pen into black ink. His handwriting remained graceful despite the dim light. Years of steady practice had taught his fingers exactly how much pressure each line required. The painter often admired the scribes. Their work resembled painting in many ways. Both required quiet hands. Both demanded patience. Both left behind stories. The only difference was whether those stories were told with words or with colors. The afternoon stretched onward. One by one, the workers paused for small drinks of water. Large clay jars stood near the entrance where the air remained coolest. The outside of each vessel felt pleasantly cool beneath the hand. The water inside had been carried from the Nile before sunrise. A young laborer carefully filled several simple cups. He carried them quietly through the chamber, offering one to each craftsman. No one drank quickly. Small slow sips refreshed tired bodies better than hurried gulps. The painter held the clay cup for a moment before drinking. The cool surface rested comfortably in his hands. He listened. Somewhere deeper inside the tomb, another group of craftsmen had begun carving. The gentle tapping reached them only faintly. Tap. Pause. Tap. Pause. The rhythm blended with the scratch of brushes until it became almost musical. No one paid much attention anymore. It simply belonged to the place. The apprentice returned to his own section of the wall. Today he had been trusted with painting several baskets of fruit carried by offering bearers. He carefully outlined each woven basket before adding figs, grapes, and pomegranates. The fruit itself seemed simple. Yet each basket required balance. Too many pieces looked crowded. Too few looked empty. He studied the master's earlier work before continuing. Not to copy exactly. Only to understand the quiet rhythm of the composition. The master noticed. He approved. Learning often began by observing. Far beyond the chamber, outside upon the cliffs, warm desert winds crossed the pale limestone. Fine grains of sand drifted across ancient pathways leading toward the workers' village. A caravan moved slowly along a distant trail. Its donkeys carried supplies toward another settlement farther south. The travelers paused briefly beneath a rocky outcrop where a little shade remained. The desert itself encouraged patience. Nothing moved quickly beneath the afternoon sun. Back inside the tomb, the painter began adding small details almost invisible from across the room. Tiny folds within linen clothing. The woven texture of reed baskets. Individual feathers upon a duck's wing. The delicate petals inside a lotus blossom. Some visitors might never notice such careful work. That did not matter. The painter noticed. His fellow craftsmen noticed. And somehow that was enough. Good work deserved care whether many eyes saw it or only a few. As he painted, memories quietly returned. He remembered his own apprenticeship many years ago. He remembered grinding pigments until his hands ached. Carrying heavy water jars. Cleaning brushes every evening. Watching older painters work without understanding how their lines seemed so effortless. Back then he had believed skill arrived suddenly. Now he understood it arrived one ordinary day at a time. One brush. One wall. One lesson. One quiet morning after another. His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of an elderly pigment maker. The man carried several small linen bundles. Inside rested finely ground minerals gathered from distant places across Egypt. Blue. Green. Deep red. Golden yellow. The painter carefully opened one bundle. The blue shimmered softly beneath the lamp. Even after many years, he never grew tired of seeing fresh pigment. It reminded him that every color had once been hidden inside stone. Only patient hands had released it. The pigment maker smiled. A good color. A very good color. It traveled far. So it deserves careful use. The older man nodded. Nothing more needed to be said. Every worker understood the value of such materials. Nothing was wasted. The painter measured only a small amount into his mixing bowl. A few drops of water. Gentle circles with a smooth stone. Slowly the dry powder became rich paint once again. The transformation never lost its quiet magic. As the afternoon gradually softened toward evening, the light outside the tomb entrance changed from brilliant white to warm gold. Inside, the lamps continued glowing steadily, almost unaware that the day beyond the mountain had begun its peaceful descent toward sunset. The workers remained calm. There was still time for a few more careful brush strokes. A few more gentle lines. A few more quiet moments of craftsmanship before they would gather their tools, walk once again beneath the open sky, and follow the dusty path home toward the welcoming smell of fresh bread, cool clay water jars, sleeping children, and another peaceful night beneath the endless stars of ancient Egypt. The quiet hours of the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening. Deep inside the limestone hillside, the painter hardly noticed the passing of the sun. The oil lamps continued to glow with the same gentle light they had offered since morning. Their small flames flickered softly whenever a faint current of air wandered through the narrow passages, casting slow-moving shadows across painted walls where birds, reeds, lotus flowers, and quiet figures seemed almost ready to step into another peaceful world. The painter lowered his brush. Not because he was finished. Only because careful hands also needed moments of stillness. He stretched his fingers one at a time. They had remained wrapped around slender reed brushes since shortly after sunrise. His wrists felt slightly stiff. His shoulders welcomed the chance to move. Nearby, the apprentice copied the movement without being asked. The older painter smiled. Some lessons were learned simply by watching. "You see," he said gently, "our hands paint better after they rest." The apprentice nodded. He rolled his shoulders and looked around the chamber. For the first time all day, he truly noticed how quiet everything had become. No one hurried. No one called instructions across the room. Each craftsman seemed surrounded by a small circle of peaceful concentration. A plaster worker quietly smoothed one final section of wall. A stone carver carefully brushed limestone dust from a carved border. The scribe gently rolled another completed sheet of papyrus before placing it inside a wooden case. The man responsible for the lamps trimmed a blackened wick with a tiny bronze knife, allowing the flame to burn brightly once again. Every task seemed connected. Every worker depended upon another. The painter often thought of the tomb as a village hidden inside the mountain. Each person arrived before sunrise. Each carried different tools. Each returned home at evening. And together they slowly filled silent rooms with careful work that might remain undisturbed for centuries. He picked up his brush once more. The next section showed a quiet garden. Small fruit trees stood beside a cool pool of water. Date palms reached toward the painted sky. Vines climbed simple wooden frames. A gardener carried 2 clay jars balanced carefully across a wooden yoke resting upon his shoulders. The painter paused before beginning. He closed his eyes for just a moment. He remembered a real garden near his own village. An elderly gardener lived there. Every morning before dawn, the old man watered his young trees while birds sang among the branches. The painter remembered the smell of damp earth. The sound of water pouring gently into narrow channels. The cool morning air before the desert warmed. He opened his eyes. Now those memories quietly guided his brush. The leaves appeared first. Long graceful strokes. Then the branches. Then clusters of dates hanging beneath broad palm fronds. The painted garden slowly became familiar. Not because it copied one particular place. Because it carried the feeling of many peaceful mornings beside the Nile. Across the chamber, one of the older craftsmen sat polishing a finished section of painted plaster with a smooth rounded stone. His movements were slow and careful. The gentle rubbing helped settle loose grains of pigment and left the surface looking wonderfully even beneath the warm lamplight. The younger workers often watched him with admiration. He had polished walls for nearly 40 years. His hands knew exactly how much pressure to use. Too much might damage the paint. Too little accomplished nothing. Experience lived quietly within simple movements. The painter glanced toward him. One day, perhaps many years from now, he too might become the oldest craftsman in the workshop. The thought did not make him feel old. It made him feel grateful. Grateful that careful work could continue through so many peaceful seasons. A little farther down the passage, 2 laborers carried empty baskets toward the entrance. The baskets had earlier held crushed limestone and broken fragments removed from another chamber. Now they were almost weightless. The younger of the 2 smiled. It feels strange when the basket is empty. His companion laughed softly. It won't stay empty tomorrow. Both men chuckled. Their voices echoed gently before fading once again into the quiet rhythm of the tomb. Near the entrance, warm afternoon sunlight stretched a little farther inside than it had earlier. A bright ribbon of golden light rested across the stone floor. Dust floated lazily through the beam, each tiny grain shining for only a moment before disappearing back into shadow. The painter often enjoyed watching those drifting particles. They reminded him that even still air was never completely still. The desert was always moving in its own gentle way. He dipped his brush into fresh blue pigment. Today he would finish the small pool at the center of the painted garden. The water needed to appear calm. Not perfectly flat. Just softly alive. A few delicate ripples spread outward from a duck resting near the reeds. Tiny fish swam beneath the surface. Lotus blossoms floated quietly nearby. Nothing disturbed the peaceful scene. It reflected the quiet waters he often passed each morning on his walk toward the cliffs. Sometimes before sunrise the Nile became so smooth that the sky itself seemed to rest upon it. He had never forgotten those mornings. The apprentice looked closely. "How do you make the water look gentle?" The master considered the question. "I remember real water." The boy frowned slightly. "But this is stone." The older painter smiled. "Stone can remember too." The apprentice looked again. Perhaps that was true. The painted water somehow carried movement without moving. He hoped one day his own work would feel the same. As the hours continued, the air inside the tomb remained pleasantly cool. Outside, however, the heat had begun to fade. A breeze wandered across the limestone cliffs, carrying the faint scent of warm sand and distant river reeds. It slipped quietly through the entrance before traveling along the stone corridors. The workers welcomed it without saying anything. Some simply paused for a breath. Others smiled almost without noticing. Even the oil lamp flames leaned gently for a moment before standing straight again. The painter walked toward the entrance carrying his empty cup. The clay water jar waited where it always did. Its rounded sides felt wonderfully cool beneath his hand. He poured another drink. The water refreshed him immediately. Nearby, the lamp keeper also paused for a drink. Neither man spoke. Some silences between friends needed no words. They stood together looking out toward the western desert. The cliffs glowed softly beneath afternoon light. Far below, the green ribbon of the Nile shimmered peacefully in the distance. Tiny fields stretched beside the river. Palm trees stood like quiet guardians along the water's edge. From here the villages looked very small. Almost hidden among the fields. Smoke rose gently from a few distant ovens where families had already begun preparing the evening meal. The painter imagined the familiar smell of fresh bread drifting through narrow streets. Soon enough he would be walking home along the dusty path once again. But not yet. There was still a little work to finish. He returned to the painted garden. Only one small bird remained incomplete. It perched lightly upon the branch of a sycamore fig tree. The painter smiled. Birds had always been among his favorite subjects. They carried quiet life into every scene. With only a few graceful strokes, feathers appeared. A small curved beak. Bright attentive eyes. Slender legs resting naturally upon the branch. The bird seemed content. The painter stepped back. The garden now felt complete. Not perfect. No craftsman ever believed that. But peaceful. And perhaps peace mattered even more than perfection. Across the chamber, the apprentice quietly cleaned his brushes for the first time without needing a reminder. He rinsed each one carefully. Straightened the reed fibers with gentle fingers. Wrapped them neatly inside linen cloth. The master noticed. He said nothing. His smile was enough. The boy had begun to understand that caring for the tools was part of caring for the work itself. Beyond the entrance, the afternoon slowly surrendered to evening. The harsh brightness of the desert softened into warm shades of gold and amber. Long shadows stretched across the rocky paths leading back toward the workers' village. Inside the mountain, the painters finished a few final brush strokes before gently placing their tools aside. Another quiet day had settled itself into the limestone walls, one careful line at a time. Without hurry. Without noise. Only through steady hands, patient hearts, and the peaceful rhythm of ordinary craftsmen whose greatest masterpieces were created not with grand moments, but with thousands of calm mornings and gentle evenings spent in the cool silence beneath the ancient hills of Egypt. The last brush stroke of the day came quietly. No one announced it. No one marked the moment with celebration. The painter simply looked at the fine line of green that completed the stem of a lotus blossom. He held the brush still for another breath, making certain the color rested exactly where it belonged. Satisfied, he lowered his hand and placed the brush carefully across the edge of his limestone palette. The chamber remained silent. For a few moments, none of the craftsmen moved. Each person seemed to be looking at the work completed that day. The warm glow of the oil lamps rested gently upon the painted walls. The colors appeared softer now than they had in the morning. The reds looked deeper. The blue seemed calm and cool. The green reeds stretched peacefully toward the painted sky, while birds stood quietly among the marsh plants as though they had always belonged there. The master painter enjoyed these last moments before leaving. The paintings looked different in the evening light. Not brighter. Not darker. Simply quieter. He believed every wall deserved one final look before the lamps were extinguished. He walked slowly along the chamber, studying every section. Here a fisherman balanced carefully inside a narrow papyrus boat. There a woman carried fresh bread in a woven basket. Farther along, a gardener watered young trees beside a peaceful pool. He smiled gently. Ordinary life filled every corner of the wall. He often wondered whether that was what made these paintings feel so comforting. They were filled not with hurried moments, but with familiar routines. The same quiet tasks repeated every day beside the Nile. Grinding grain. Baking bread. Fishing. Harvesting. Carrying water. Tending gardens. Painting them had allowed him to notice their quiet beauty. Near the entrance, the apprentice gathered the small bowls of pigment. He placed lids upon each one before wrapping them in clean linen. The older craftsman had taught him never to leave colors uncovered. Dust found its way into everything if given enough time. The desert was patient. So were the workers. The apprentice carefully counted each brush before placing them into a woven basket. The master watched from across the room. "Did you forget anything?" The boy looked around. His eyes searched the floor. The stools. The shelves. The stone ledges. Finally he noticed a small polishing stone resting beside the wall. He picked it up and smiled. "I almost did." The master nodded kindly. "Tomorrow is easier when today ends well." The apprentice tucked the stone safely into the basket. He knew the lesson was about much more than tools. Across another chamber, the lamp keeper moved slowly from flame to flame. With practiced fingers, he covered each small lamp one at a time. The light faded gently. The first corner slipped into shadow. Then another. The chamber slowly grew darker, though enough lamps remained lit for everyone to finish preparing for the walk home. The painter always found this part of the day peaceful. The tomb seemed to grow sleepy. Its bright colors disappeared little by little into the evening darkness, waiting quietly for another dawn. Nearby, a stone carver brushed fine limestone dust from his shoulders. His linen clothing had turned almost white after a full day of carving. He laughed softly. "My wife will know exactly what I worked on today." Another craftsman smiled. "My children always try to guess." The painter joined the quiet laughter. Every trade carried its own marks home. The potter carried clay beneath his fingernails. The carpenter smelled of cedar and fresh wood. The fisherman carried the scent of river water. And the painter often returned with tiny traces of blue or red still resting upon his hands. Before leaving, he washed his brushes one final time. He dipped each one into a shallow bowl of clean water. Slow circles. Gentle movements. He carefully pressed the moisture from the reed fibers using a folded piece of linen. Then he straightened each tip between his fingers. A good brush, if cared for properly, could serve through many months of careful work. Waste had little place inside the workshop. Nothing useful was treated carelessly. Outside the entrance, the desert air had become wonderfully comfortable. The heat of midday had begun to drift away. Warm golden light covered the limestone cliffs. Long shadows stretched across the rocky paths leading toward the workers' village below. One by one, the craftsmen stepped out into the open air. Many paused for just a moment. After spending the day beneath stone ceilings, the wide sky always felt surprisingly large. The painter lifted his eyes. The evening sky glowed with soft shades of amber, pale gold, and gentle blue. A few birds crossed silently overhead, flying back toward the green banks of the Nile. Far below, fields shimmered quietly in the fading sunlight. Smoke rose from village ovens where evening bread had begun to bake. The familiar smell reached even the lower slopes of the cliffs whenever the breeze traveled in the right direction. The painter took a slow breath. He enjoyed this walk home almost as much as the work itself. There was no hurry now. Tomorrow would come soon enough. The group of craftsmen began descending the well-worn path together. Their sandals pressed softly against the dusty ground. Small stones rolled gently beneath their feet. No one rushed ahead. Years of walking the same trail had taught them a comfortable pace. The apprentice walked beside the master. "Do you ever become tired of painting the same things?" he asked. The older man smiled without answering immediately. He watched the sunlight resting across distant fields. After a few quiet moments, he spoke. "Does the Nile become tired of flowing?" The apprentice thought for a while. "I suppose not. The river looks different every morning." He looked toward the valley below. "So do the flowers. So do the birds. So do the people." The boy nodded slowly. The master continued. "I have painted many lotus flowers." He smiled. "But I have never painted the same morning twice." The apprentice carried those words quietly as they continued walking. Below them, farmers were already leaving their fields. Wooden hoes rested across tired shoulders. Oxen walked calmly toward simple shelters. Women returned from village wells carrying fresh water inside cool clay jars. Children ran gently through shaded streets before their parents called them home. The painter recognized many faces as he entered the village. A baker stood outside his oven, placing warm loaves upon woven trays to cool. The rich smell of fresh bread drifted through the evening air. An old fisherman sat repairing a small tier in his net beneath a sycamore tree. A potter arranged newly fired water jars beside his workshop. Nothing about the village felt hurried. Everyone seemed to move with the quiet rhythm that evening naturally brought. The painter reached his home. His youngest daughter was waiting near the doorway. She smiled as soon as she saw him. "You came back with blue on your hands again." He looked down and laughed softly. A tiny streak of blue pigment still rested along one finger despite washing. "I suppose I did." She took his hand carefully. "I like the blue." "So do I." Inside the house, the evening meal waited. Fresh bread. warm lentils, onions, a handful of sweet dates. Cool water poured from the family's largest clay jar. The room felt peaceful. The thick mud brick walls had protected it from the day's heat, and now the evening breeze wandered gently through the open doorway. The painter washed his hands once more before sitting beside his family. As the sun slipped quietly behind the western hills and the first stars prepared to appear above the timeless Nile, another ordinary day gently folded itself into memory, a day of steady hands, quiet conversations, cool stone chambers, soft lamplight, and patient brush strokes, each one adding another small piece to a work that asked for nothing more than calm attention, thoughtful care, and the peaceful rhythm of a life devoted to painting beauty into silence. Morning returned as gently as it always did. Long before the first rays of sunlight touched the limestone cliffs, the village rested beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. The air was cool, carrying the fresh scent of the Nile across fields that still glistened with a little moisture from the night. Palm leaves barely moved. Somewhere near the riverbank, a frog called once before falling silent again. Inside the painter's home, the little oil lamp had burned low. Its flame was no larger than a grain of barley. The room remained peaceful. His family still slept upon woven reed mats spread across the flat rooftop, where the night breeze had made the warm season easier to bear. The painter rose quietly, careful not to disturb anyone. He enjoyed these moments before dawn. The world seemed to belong to only a few people. The bakers, the fishermen, the farmers, the guards, and craftsmen like himself. He stepped into the courtyard carrying a small clay cup. The family water jar stood against the coolest wall, where it had rested through the night. Its surface felt wonderfully cool beneath his hand. Tiny drops of moisture had formed on the outside. He poured himself a drink. The water tasted fresh. He stood quietly for a few moments, listening. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the neighboring houses. A donkey shifted its weight inside a nearby shelter. Far away, he could hear the gentle splash of an oar touching the calm Nile. The village was slowly waking. His wife came downstairs carrying a woven basket. Without speaking, she began shaping small rounds of dough prepared the evening before. The painter gathered dry reeds for the oven. Together they worked in comfortable silence. Years of living together had taught them that not every quiet moment needed words. Soon the smell of fresh bread filled the courtyard. Warm flour. A little smoke. The comforting scent of baking grain. It drifted into the narrow street where other families were beginning the same familiar routine. The painter's youngest daughter wandered into the courtyard rubbing her sleepy eyes. She smiled when she saw the bread. "Is it ready?" "Almost." She sat beside the clay oven, enjoying the warmth of the morning fire before the day's heat arrived. The painter watched her for a moment. Children seemed to grow almost as quickly as the barley after the Nile flood. He wondered how many more mornings she would wait beside the oven before becoming old enough to help with the baking herself. His son entered a few moments later carrying 2 empty baskets. "I'm going to the market after breakfast," the boy said. "What will you bring home?" "If mother tells me." His wife laughed softly. "I always do." The family shared their morning meal together. Fresh bread still warm from the oven. A little goat cheese. Dates. Onions. Cool water from the clay jar. Simple food. Enough to begin another day. The painter ate slowly. There was no reason to hurry. The tomb would still be waiting. After breakfast he prepared his tools once again. Every brush was examined carefully. He straightened the reed fibers with his fingers. The stone palette was clean. pigment bowls were tightly covered. The measuring cord remained neatly rolled. Everything was exactly where it belonged. His daughter watched him from the doorway. "Do your brushes ever get tired?" He smiled. "I think they sleep at night." She giggled. "And do they wake up happy?" "They do if I clean them well." She nodded very seriously. That seemed like an important lesson. Outside, the eastern sky glowed with soft pink and pale gold. The first sunlight reached the tops of distant palm trees. Birds began flying low across the fields beside the Nile. Farmers walked quietly toward their crops carrying wooden hoes across their shoulders. The painter stepped onto the dusty village road. He greeted neighbors as he passed. An elderly potter was already arranging fresh water jars outside his workshop. The smooth clay still carried the faint warmth of yesterday's firing. The potter raised one hand in greeting. "Another day beneath the mountain." The painter nodded. "And another day beside the kiln." The potter smiled. "We both spend our lives with earth." The painter laughed softly. "Only in different shapes." A little farther along the road, the village carpenter sat beneath a reed shelter sharpening bronze tools. Fresh cedar shavings covered the ground around his workbench. The sweet smell of wood drifted through the cool morning air. A young apprentice swept the floor carefully before arranging wooden planks in neat stacks. The painter paused for only a moment. He enjoyed watching other craftsmen begin their work. Each trade carried its own peaceful rhythm. The carpenter listened to the grain hidden inside wood. The potter listened to clay beneath his hands. The fisherman watched the quiet movement of water. And the painter listened to silence inside stone. Soon the green fields stretched before him. The narrow footpath wound between irrigation canals carrying fresh water from the Nile. The water moved slowly. Tiny ripples reflected the growing morning light. Several white birds stood motionless near the banks, waiting patiently for small fish. The painter stopped beside the canal. He always did. Not because he needed to. Because he enjoyed watching the water before entering the stillness of the tomb. An elderly farmer noticed him. "You like looking at the river?" "I do. It never looks the same." The painter smiled. "No." The farmer leaned on his wooden hoe. "My father used to say that if you watch the Nile every morning, you learn patience." The painter looked across the calm water. I think he was right. They wished one another a peaceful day before continuing along separate paths. The painter gradually left the green fields behind. The fertile earth gave way to pale sand and scattered stones. Ahead, the western cliffs rose quietly beneath the strengthening sun. Their smooth limestone faces reflected soft golden light. From a distance they appeared empty. Silent. Yet he knew countless chambers rested within them. Hidden rooms. Cool corridors. Walls waiting for another day of careful hands. As he climbed the familiar path, he noticed small desert flowers growing between cracks in the stone. They were tiny. Easy to miss. Yet they had found enough life to bloom even here. He admired them. Beauty, he often thought, did not need a large place to grow. At the entrance to the tomb, the first workers had already arrived. The lamp keeper unpacked fresh oil. The plaster workers carried clean water. Stone carvers arranged their chisels neatly upon folded linen. The apprentice waved happily when he saw the master. "I remembered everything today." The painter looked into the basket. Every brush. Every bowl. Every cloth. Nothing forgotten. "Very good." The boy smiled proudly. Together they stepped inside. Immediately the air became cooler. The bright morning sunlight faded behind them. The familiar smell of limestone greeted them like an old friend. The quiet corridors welcomed their footsteps. Soon the first oil lamp was lit. Then another. Then another. Warm circles of golden light slowly awakened the painted walls. The birds appeared once more. The lotus flowers. The fishermen. The gardens. The quiet people carrying bread and water. It almost felt as though the paintings themselves had been sleeping through the night, waiting patiently for the craftsmen to return. The master painter stood before yesterday's work. He remained silent for several long moments. He always looked before he painted. Fresh eyes often noticed small things that tired eyes had missed the evening before. His gaze wandered slowly across every figure. Every flower. Every leaf. Every line. He smiled gently. The garden still felt peaceful. The birds still rested quietly among the branches. The pool still reflected calm water. Nothing seemed hurried. That pleased him. He reached for a fresh brush. Nearby, the apprentice quietly uncovered the pigment bowls one by one. Blue. Green. Red. Yellow. Black. White. The familiar colors waited patiently inside their small stone containers. The painter poured a few drops of water into the blue pigment. He mixed it slowly. Round and round the smooth grinding stone moved. The rich color gradually awakened beneath his careful hand. Outside, the morning sun climbed steadily above the Nile valley. Inside the cool heart of the mountain, another peaceful day was just beginning, where every brush stroke would once again become part of a quiet rhythm that had flowed through generations of Egyptian craftsmen, as steady as the river itself and as gentle as the first light touching the ancient land. The fresh blue pigment rested quietly inside the shallow stone bowl. The painter stirred it a few more times with the smooth grinding stone, watching the last tiny grains dissolve into the water. When the color became soft and even, he placed the stone aside and gently lifted one of his finest brushes. He never hurried this first moment. The beginning of each day deserved patience. The apprentice stood nearby, holding another small bowl filled with green pigment. He waited without speaking. Over the past months, he had learned that the first quiet minutes inside the tomb were almost as important as the work itself. The older craftsmen believed that a calm beginning often led to a calm day. The painter stepped closer to the wall. The painted garden from yesterday seemed to welcome him back. The sycamore tree stretched its branches across the plaster. Lotus blossoms floated peacefully upon still water. The small bird resting on the branch looked just as gentle as it had the evening before. He smiled softly. It felt almost like greeting old friends. Today another section waited beside the garden. Only faint guidelines had been sketched there by the scribe. Soon they would become a peaceful vineyard. The painter carefully studied the empty space. He imagined vines climbing simple wooden frames. Workers gathering ripe grapes into woven baskets. A quiet path winding between rows of green leaves. Nothing crowded. Nothing rushed. The wall itself seemed to suggest where everything belonged. He dipped his brush into green. The first vine appeared. Its stem curved gently upward. Another followed beside it. Each line remained graceful and unhurried. The apprentice watched closely. "You never paint a straight vine," he whispered. The master smiled. "Have you ever seen one in the fields?" The boy thought for a moment. "No." "Then neither should I." The apprentice nodded. Nature moved gently. So should the brush. Farther down the chamber, the stone carvers had already begun their work. Soft tapping echoed through the cool corridors. The sound was steady, never loud. Tap. Pause. Tap. Pause. The painter hardly noticed it anymore. It had become part of the mountain's quiet breathing. Nearby, one of the plaster workers carried fresh plaster to another unfinished wall. He moved slowly, careful not to spill even a little. Each basket represented many hours of preparation. Nothing inside the workshop was wasted. When he reached the wall, he spread the plaster with long, even movements. The wet surface reflected the warm glow of the lamps. Soon another painter would stand before it with colors and brushes. Every craft depended upon another. The painter often admired that quiet balance. No one worked alone. The vineyard slowly grew beneath his hand. Broad leaves spread across the wooden trellises. Tiny curling tendrils reached outward. Clusters of grapes began to appear, first as simple circles, then as carefully shaded fruit. He remembered walking through vineyards during harvest season. The air had smelled sweet. Workers had laughed quietly while filling baskets. Children had carried fallen grapes to their mothers. Even the donkeys seemed content as they waited beside wooden carts. Those memories settled naturally into the painting. The apprentice mixed a little more purple pigment. He carried it carefully to the master. Would this work? The painter tested it upon a small practice stone. It is a little dark. The boy looked disappointed. The master added a tiny amount of red. Then a little white. He stirred slowly. Colors are like people. The apprentice looked curious. They are happiest when they are balanced. The boy smiled. He would remember that. For a while neither of them spoke. Only the quiet work continued. The oil lamps glowed steadily. The cool stone surrounded them. The brushes moved with slow confidence across the waiting plaster. Outside, the desert was already warming beneath the rising sun. Inside, the air remained pleasantly cool. A faint breeze wandered through the entrance. It carried the distant smell of dry sand and warm rock. The painter paused. He lifted his eyes toward the doorway. Beyond it, a narrow strip of brilliant blue sky could be seen. A hawk circled high above the cliffs. Its shadow crossed the pale stone for only a moment before disappearing. He watched quietly. Then he returned to his work. The mountain and the sky belonged together. So did silence and color. As the morning continued, more of the vineyard appeared. A man carried a basket filled with ripe grapes upon his shoulder. His linen clothing hung in soft folds. Another worker reached carefully toward a vine, gathering fruit with patient hands. A young child followed behind carrying a much smaller basket. The painter smiled while adding the child. He enjoyed placing children into scenes whenever he could. They reminded him of his own family. The apprentice noticed. "You paint children often." "I do." "Why?" The master rested his brush for a moment. "They make the wall feel alive." The apprentice looked carefully. He understood. The adults worked. The children watched, carried, learned, and smiled. That was how villages truly looked. The wall should remember that. At the far end of the chamber, the scribe approached carrying a fresh sheet of papyrus. He quietly studied the newly painted vines. "Beautiful work," he said softly. The painter bowed his head slightly. "The wall has been kind today." The scribe smiled. He appreciated that answer. No craftsman claimed all the credit. Good work belonged to many hands. The plaster worker, the pigment grinder, the lamp keeper, the apprentice. even the laborer who carried water before sunrise. Without any one of them, the painting would never appear. The scribe made several neat notes before moving quietly away. Time passed almost unnoticed. The painter finished another cluster of grapes. Then another. The vineyard stretched farther across the wall. Each vine seemed connected to the next, just as each day connected gently to the one before it. Nothing stood alone. Around midday, one of the younger workers entered carrying fresh water from a shaded storage jar. The clay cups were passed quietly from hand to hand. The painter drank slowly. The water was cool. It carried the faint earthy taste that came from resting inside clay through the morning. He welcomed every sip. Nearby, the apprentice sighed contentedly. I never knew water could taste this good. The older painter laughed softly. It always does after careful work. The boy smiled. Perhaps that was true. The simplest things often felt richest after patient labor. The cups were returned. The brushes were lifted once more. The chamber settled back into its familiar rhythm. Outside, the warm desert wind crossed the limestone cliffs. Inside, beneath the gentle glow of oil lamps, the vineyard continued to grow one quiet brush stroke at a time, as another peaceful morning slipped softly into afternoon within the cool and timeless heart of ancient Egypt. The quiet afternoon arrived almost unnoticed. Inside the tomb, the soft light of the oil lamps remained steady, making it difficult to tell how high the sun had climbed beyond the limestone cliffs. The cool stone walls held the same gentle silence they had offered since dawn, and the peaceful rhythm of work continued without interruption. The painter leaned back from the wall. The vineyard had begun to take shape. Rows of carefully painted vines stretched across the smooth plaster, their broad leaves casting gentle painted shadows over clusters of ripe grapes. Between the vines, narrow paths curved naturally through the garden, inviting the eye to wander slowly from one corner of the scene to another. He was pleased. Not because it was finished. Because it felt calm. That was always his first hope. A painting should never make the eye feel hurried. It should allow the mind to rest, just as the shade of a sycamore tree offered comfort during a hot afternoon. He placed the brush into a bowl of clean water. Tiny clouds of green drifted away from the reed fibers before disappearing completely. He watched them for a moment. Even washing a brush had its own quiet beauty. Nearby, the apprentice carefully arranged small bowls of pigment in a neat line. Blue beside green. Red beside yellow. Black beside white. The boy had begun to organize his tools without being reminded. The master noticed. He said nothing. Some praise could be spoken without words. Across the chamber, the lamp keeper quietly adjusted a wick that had begun to burn unevenly. He trimmed the darkened end with a small bronze knife. Almost immediately the flame grew brighter. Warm light spread gently across the painted wall. The colors seemed to awaken. The blue water became deeper. The green leaves looked softer. The golden baskets appeared warmer. The painter smiled. Light itself was another quiet craftsman. Farther down the passage, a stone mason rested upon a low stool. He rubbed his hands together slowly, removing fine limestone dust from his palms. Years of carving had left his fingers broad and strong. When the painter looked at those hands, he always thought they resembled old tree roots. Steady. Reliable. Patient. The mason noticed him smiling. What are you thinking? I was thinking that your hands have shaped many walls. The mason chuckled. And yours have covered them. The painter nodded. We work together. We always have. The conversation ended there. Nothing more needed to be said. The quiet understanding between craftsmen often lived in only a few words. The painter returned to his work. This afternoon he would begin adding the small details that brought life to the vineyard. A woven basket rested beneath one vine. Its pattern required careful attention. One thin line crossed another. Then another. The weaving slowly appeared. The basket seemed almost ready to be lifted by careful hands. Beside it, he painted several fallen grapes resting upon the ground. Small details. Easy to overlook. Yet he believed they mattered. Real gardens were never perfectly tidy. Nature always left gentle surprises behind. The apprentice watched carefully. "You paint the grapes that no one picked." The master nodded. "Someone always misses a few." The boy smiled. "My mother says the same after harvest." The painter laughed softly. "Your mother is wise." The boy thought about that as he mixed another bowl of color. Perhaps wisdom could be found in ordinary things. Outside the entrance, the afternoon breeze had grown a little stronger. It carried tiny grains of sand across the rocky paths. Some drifted gently into the first corridor before settling harmlessly upon the stone floor. One young laborer quietly swept them away with a bundle of dry reeds. The painter watched him for a moment. Even sweeping had its own rhythm. Long slow strokes. No hurry. The mountain would gather more dust tomorrow. That was simply its nature. Near another wall, two painters worked together on a broad scene showing fields ready for harvest. One painted tall stalks of grain. The other added workers carrying wooden sickles. Neither interrupted the other. Each understood exactly where the next brush stroke belonged. Years of working side by side had created a silent conversation between their hands. The master admired that. He hoped one day he and his apprentice would understand each other so easily. The scribe entered quietly carrying fresh papyrus rolled beneath one arm. He stopped before the vineyard scene. For several moments he simply looked. Then he smiled. "The leaves almost move." The painter bowed his head. "I remembered the breeze." The scribe nodded. "That is why." He wrote several notes before continuing through the passage. The painter often appreciated the scribe's careful observations. He noticed feelings as much as shapes. The afternoon passed gently. No one counted the hours. The workers measured time differently. By empty pigment bowls. By finished sections of wall. By the shortening length of lamp wicks. By the growing hunger that slowly reminded them evening was approaching. The painter dipped his brush into a warm brown color. Today he wished to paint a simple wooden ladder leaning against one of the vineyard frames. It was not an important object. Few people might notice it. Yet he had seen such ladders countless times. Weathered by sun. Smoothed by many hands. Left quietly beneath vines after the day's work. He painted it carefully. Each wooden rung carried slight signs of use. Nothing looked new. Nothing appeared worn beyond repair. It simply belonged. The apprentice tilted his head. "You even paint the old ladder." The master smiled. "The ladder helps gather the grapes. So it belongs. Everything that belongs deserves care." The boy repeated those words softly. Everything that belongs deserves care. He hoped he would remember them for many years. A little farther along the corridor, several laborers delivered fresh clay jars filled with clean water. The jars had been wrapped in damp cloth during the journey from the village to help keep the water cool. The painter touched one gently. The clay felt pleasantly chilled. He poured himself another small drink. As he lifted the cup, he noticed tiny blue stains still resting beneath one fingernail. No matter how carefully he washed, some colors chose to stay. He smiled. His daughter would probably notice again that evening. The thought warmed him. Family often entered his mind during quiet work. He imagined his wife weaving linen beneath the shaded courtyard. His son returning from the market carrying onions and fresh herbs. His youngest daughter sitting beside her grandmother, listening to old stories while helping grind grain. Ordinary moments. The same kind he painted every day. Perhaps that was why his work felt familiar. He painted what he loved. As the afternoon slowly leaned toward evening, the vineyard became fuller. Birds perched among the vines. A clay jar rested beneath a patch of shade. A small woven mat lay near the basket of grapes, as though a worker had paused for a quiet meal before returning to the harvest. The scene felt complete. Not crowded. Simply lived in. The painter stepped back several slow paces. He folded his hands before him. The vineyard seemed peaceful enough that he could almost imagine hearing leaves moving gently in the breeze. He closed his eyes for one brief moment. In his memory he stood once again beside the real vineyards along the Nile, where warm sunlight filtered through broad leaves, workers laughed softly across the rows, and the sweet scent of ripe grapes mixed with the smell of damp earth after morning watering. When he opened his eyes again, the painted wall held that same quiet feeling. He smiled. Sometimes the greatest success was not in making stone look alive. Sometimes it was in helping stillness feel gentle. The lamps continued to glow. The cool chamber embraced the quiet craftsman. And while the golden afternoon slowly drifted across the ancient cliffs outside, another peaceful piece of Egypt found its place upon the silent walls, where patient hands transformed memory into color, and ordinary life became something timeless. The quiet stillness of the chamber lingered like cool air beneath the stone ceiling. The painter remained where he stood for several moments, looking at the finished vineyard. He had learned long ago that there was no need to rush toward the next section of the wall. A painting deserved a little silence after it was completed, just as a field deserved rest after the harvest. He folded his hands behind his back. The vines stretched gently across the plaster. Their broad leaves curled naturally around the wooden frames. The baskets overflowed with ripe grapes. A small child reached carefully toward a low branch while an older worker smiled nearby. Nothing dramatic happened within the scene. Nothing needed to. Life itself was enough. The apprentice stepped beside him. They looked together without speaking. Finally the boy whispered, "It feels peaceful." The master smiled. "Then it is ready." The apprentice looked surprised. "You do not say it looks beautiful." The older man shook his head. "Beauty is quiet." The boy repeated those words softly. "Beauty is quiet." He hoped he would remember them every time he lifted a brush. The painter walked farther down the wall. A fresh section of smooth plaster waited patiently. Its pale surface reflected the warm glow of the nearest oil lamp. It reminded him of fresh linen before the first thread was woven. Anything could appear there. A riverside garden. A family preparing bread. A fisherman mending his net. A shepherd resting beneath a tree. The empty wall carried endless possibilities. He did not begin immediately. Instead, he sat upon his wooden stool. From a small linen pouch, he removed a smooth piece of charcoal. Before color came drawing. Before drawing came thought. The charcoal barely touched the plaster. A faint curved line appeared. Then another. The outlines were so light that someone standing across the room could hardly see them. Only the painter knew where the picture was beginning. The apprentice leaned closer. "What are we painting today?" The master answered without lifting his eyes. "A bakery." The boy smiled. "I like the smell of bread." "So do I." The charcoal continued moving gently. A clay oven slowly appeared. Large round loaves rested upon woven trays. A woman bent over a grinding stone preparing fresh flour. Nearby, another shaped dough with patient hands. A child carried a small basket filled with kindling. The painter paused. He smiled to himself. He could almost smell warm bread simply from remembering it. The memories came easily. Every morning before work, his own home filled with that familiar scent. The warmth of the clay oven. The sound of grain being ground. The quiet conversation between family members before sunrise. Those simple moments deserved to live upon the wall. The apprentice watched every line. "You remember everything?" The painter laughed gently. "No. I remember enough." "How?" "I pay attention." The boy thought quietly. Perhaps paying attention was more important than having a perfect memory. The chamber remained peaceful. Elsewhere, the workers continued their own tasks. A plaster maker mixed another batch using careful circles inside a large stone basin. The thick white mixture slowly became smooth beneath his wooden paddle. Nearby, the lamp keeper quietly replaced a nearly empty oil jar with a full one. Fresh oil flowed slowly into each lamp. The flames remained steady. The painter appreciated him greatly. Without light, there would be no painting. Without careful lamps, colors would become uncertain. Every craftsman quietly depended upon another. A little farther away, an elderly carpenter repaired one of the workshop's wooden stools. Years of use had loosened one leg. Instead of replacing it, he carefully tightened the joints with wooden pegs shaped by hand. Nothing was wasted. Good tools deserved long lives. The painter admired that way of thinking. Brushes, stools, water jars, pigment bowls. Everything carried the marks of many peaceful days. As the charcoal sketch slowly filled the wall, the painter began noticing small details. A sack of grain leaning against the wall. A wooden paddle resting beside the oven. A clay jar filled with water. Bundles of reeds stacked neatly for tomorrow's fire. He added each object carefully. Not because anyone had asked. Because those quiet things belonged there. His daughter often noticed little details others overlooked. Once she had pointed toward a painted basket and asked why one handle looked worn. He had smiled. Because baskets carried many years inside them. Perhaps walls should remember that too. The apprentice prepared fresh red pigment. He ground the ochre slowly upon the limestone palette. The powder became finer with every circle. The master listened to the gentle scraping sound. It reminded him of his own apprentice days. Back then he had spent entire mornings preparing colors before ever touching a brush. At first he had wished to paint immediately. Now he understood. Preparing the colors was already part of the painting. Nothing truly began with the brush. It began with patience. Outside the tomb, the afternoon breeze crossed the western cliffs. A small cloud of desert sand drifted lazily across the rocky path. Below, beside the Nile, farmers guided water into narrow channels feeding vegetable gardens. Women washed linen along the riverbank. Fishermen repaired nets beneath clusters of palm trees. The painter could not see any of those things from inside the chamber. Yet he carried them quietly in his thoughts. Whenever he painted daily life, he felt connected to the entire valley. Every village, every field, Every bakery, every fishing boat, each belonged to the same peaceful rhythm. The apprentice interrupted his thoughts. Master. Yes. Do you think someone will see these paintings many years from now? The painter rested the charcoal. He looked slowly across the chamber. The lamp flames flickered softly. The painted birds seemed almost ready to fly. The gardens waited in everlasting bloom. The vineyard rested forever in harvest season. Finally he answered. I hope they feel calm. The apprentice nodded. You do not hope they admire your work. The older man smiled warmly. If they leave with peaceful hearts, that is enough. The boy quietly lowered his eyes. He understood a little better each day. Skill mattered. But kindness inside the work mattered too. The master picked up a brush once more. He dipped it into warm brown pigment. The first lines of the bakery appeared over the charcoal sketch. The clay oven took shape. The woven bread trays. The smooth wooden paddle used to lift loaves from the fire. Every careful stroke carried the memory of countless mornings filled with warm bread and quiet family conversations. Outside, the sun continued its slow journey toward evening. Inside, the cool stone chambers welcomed another peaceful afternoon of steady hands and patient hearts. The bakery slowly emerged from the pale plaster, just as the vineyard had before it, not through hurried effort or grand inspiration, but through ordinary moments remembered with care, painted one gentle brush stroke at a time until the silent wall once again held a small piece of everyday life beside the timeless waters of the ancient Nile. The bakery began with simple shapes. The painter never hurried to add details before the larger forms found their proper places. He believed that every good painting needed a quiet foundation, much like a mud brick home began with carefully prepared earth before the walls slowly rose beneath skilled hands. He dipped his brush into a mixture of warm brown and soft red. The rounded clay oven appeared first. Its curved surface was familiar to him. He had watched ovens like this since childhood. Every village had several. Some stood inside family courtyards. Others belonged to larger bakeries where neighbors gathered before sunrise. He carefully painted the smooth curve of the oven. Then he stepped back. Only after looking from a distance did he continue. The apprentice noticed. You always walk away. The master smiled. The wall speaks more clearly from a few steps back. The boy quietly took 3 steps away as well. He looked at the unfinished bakery. It does look different. The older painter nodded. When you stand too close, you only see the brush. And farther away, you see the story. The apprentice carried those words with him. Perhaps stories were built the same way as walls. One careful piece at a time. The chamber remained wrapped in its familiar calm. The warm glow of the lamp softened every edge of the limestone. The colors appeared gentle beneath their steady light. No harsh brightness disturbed the quiet atmosphere. Even the echoes seemed tired, moving slowly through the stone corridors before disappearing into silence. Nearby, the plaster workers had finished another smooth section of wall. One of them ran his fingertips lightly across its surface. His experienced hands searched for imperfections. He paused at one small place. Without frustration, he mixed a little more plaster. A single careful movement corrected the flaw. Then he smiled quietly. Sometimes the smallest repairs created the greatest comfort for the painter who would later stand there. The master appreciated that thoughtfulness. He often believed that kindness could be seen even in work no one noticed. He returned to the bakery scene. Now came the people. A woman knelt beside a large grinding stone. One hand rested upon the wooden handle. The other steadied the grain. Her movements were calm. The painter remembered his own wife working before dawn. The slow turning of the grinding stone. The gentle sound of grain becoming flour. The smell of fresh meal drifting into the cool morning air. He painted those memories without realizing how naturally they guided his hand. Beside the woman stood a young boy carrying a small sack of grain. The sack looked almost too large for him. Yet he held it carefully. The painter smiled. Children often insisted upon helping, even when the task was difficult. His own son had once carried baskets far too heavy for his small shoulders. The basket had nearly tipped over. His wife had left. His son had laughed too. Years later, the memory still warmed him. He quietly added that same gentle determination to the painted child. Across the chamber, one of the elder painters was working on a long border filled with repeating lotus blossoms. Each flower resembled the last. Yet none were exactly alike. The apprentice watched for a moment. How does he keep painting the same flower? The master looked over. He isn't. They look the same. They belong together. The boy frowned thoughtfully. The older man continued. Look closer. The apprentice stepped nearer. One blossom leaned slightly to the left. Another opened wider. A third remained almost closed. Tiny differences appeared everywhere. The apprentice smiled. They are like real flowers. The master nodded. Exactly. Outside the entrance, the afternoon breeze carried the faint scent of warm desert stone. Occasionally it drifted into the corridor, bringing cool relief despite the comfortable temperature already held within the mountain. The lamps flickered gently. Their shadows moved across the painted walls like slow clouds passing over fields. The painter paused once again. Not because he was tired. Because he enjoyed listening. There was something peaceful about the workshop's quiet sounds. A brush softly touching plaster. The scrape of a grinding stone. A distant chisel tapping limestone. The rustle of linen cloth. Someone pouring water into a clay cup. These sounds had surrounded him for so many years that he could hardly imagine a day without them. They formed the music of his life. The apprentice mixed fresh white pigment. He looked uncertain. Is this enough? The master examined the bowl. A little more limestone. The boy added a small pinch. He stirred patiently. The color became smoother. The master smiled. You learn faster now. The apprentice lowered his eyes. I watch carefully. That is why. Watching. Listening. Waiting. The master believed these were the true tools of a painter. Brushes and pigments mattered. But quiet attention mattered even more. He returned to the bakery. Fresh loaves now rested upon woven trays. Their rounded tops caught the warm light from the painted oven. He added gentle lines showing the woven pattern beneath them. Nearby, a clay jar waited beside a wooden paddle. Another woman shaped dough upon a low table. The entire scene felt warm without showing flames. It carried the comfort of daily life. The painter liked that. Warmth could exist in memory as much as in fire. The scribe approached once more. He stopped beside the master. You remembered the baker's paddle. The painter laughed softly. I almost forgot it. But you didn't. No. The scribe smiled. It is often the small things. The painter nodded. The small things make the room feel lived in. The scribe quietly wrote another note before continuing along the passage. The painter often wondered whether the scribe noticed details more carefully than anyone else. Perhaps writing trained the eyes differently. The afternoon slowly deepened. Outside, the sunlight had begun its long journey toward the western horizon. Inside, the steady lamplight changed very little. Time seemed softer here, measured not by shadows but by completed brush strokes. The apprentice carefully cleaned one of the smaller brushes before handing it to the master. Without speaking, the painter accepted it. Their movements had begun fitting together naturally. The apprentice could now guess which brush would be needed next. The master no longer needed to ask. That quiet understanding pleased them both. Farther inside the tomb, laughter drifted softly from another chamber. Only for a moment. Someone had likely told a simple story while sharing water. The sound quickly faded. Silence returned. The painter smiled. Even laughter felt gentle inside the mountain. He stepped back once more. The bakery had grown richer, more complete. Yet it still invited another day's work. There would be baskets to finish, clay jars to paint, small birds perhaps resting upon the rooftop. Maybe a family cat waiting patiently beside the oven for crumbs. He would decide tomorrow. There was no need to hurry today. The wall had all the time in the world. And so, beneath the quiet glow of patient lamps, while the warm afternoon slowly softened beyond the limestone cliffs and the Nile continued its endless journey through fertile fields below, the painter laid down another series of calm brush strokes, allowing ordinary life to settle gently upon the silent walls, where the smell of imagined bread, the quiet rhythm of family work, and the peaceful beauty of simple moments would remain forever undisturbed within the cool heart of ancient Egypt. The afternoon settled into an even quieter rhythm. Deep within the cool stone chambers, the painter could no longer hear the wind outside. The thick limestone walls wrapped the workshop in gentle silence, leaving only the familiar sounds of careful hands at work. A brush glided softly over plaster. A stone pallet whispered beneath a grinding tool. Somewhere farther down the passage, a small clay cup touched the floor with a quiet tap. The painter looked once more at the bakery scene. It had begun to feel warm. Not because of the painted oven alone. Because every person within it seemed peaceful. The woman shaping bread leaned slightly forward, her hands calm and steady. The child carrying grain walked with quiet determination. The baskets rested where they belonged. Nothing appeared forced. Everything simply lived together. He believed that was the greatest compliment a painting could earn. If someone forgot they were looking at painted figures for just a moment, then perhaps the wall had found its own quiet life. He sat upon his wooden stool again. For a little while he simply rested his hands upon his knees. His fingers were stained with small traces of red and blue. Fine lines crossed his palms, shaped by years of holding brushes and polishing stones. He slowly opened and closed his hands. The movement eased the stiffness that always arrived after many hours of careful work. The apprentice noticed. "My fingers become tired too." The master smiled. "They are learning." "Does it stop?" The older painter looked thoughtfully at his hands. "No. But they grow stronger." The apprentice nodded. That answer pleased him. Across the chamber, the oldest craftsman in the workshop carefully folded a linen cloth over several finished brushes. His hair had become almost completely white. His movements had slowed over the years. Yet no one painted straighter lines. The younger workers often wondered how his hands remained so steady. The painter believed the answer was simple. Years of patience had settled into them. The elderly craftsman looked up and noticed the apprentice watching. He lifted one brush. "Do you know why this brush still works?" The apprentice shook his head. Because every evening I thank it with clean water. The boy smiled. The old man laughed softly. I am only half joking. Everyone nearby smiled as well. There was kindness hidden inside small habits. The painter returned to the bakery wall. Today he wished to add the smallest details. They were never the first things people noticed. But often they were the things remembered longest. He painted a woven mat resting near the oven. Its reed fibers crossed each other in neat rows. Then he added a clay bowl holding freshly ground flour. A wooden scoop rested inside it. Nearby, he painted a simple stool with one leg slightly shorter than the others. He remembered sitting upon many stools just like that. They rocked gently whenever someone shifted their weight. No one thought much about it. It was simply part of daily life. The apprentice tilted his head. You paint old stools too? The master laughed quietly. I sit on one every day. The boy looked at the stool beneath him. So do I. They both smiled. The painter often believed ordinary things deserved as much attention as grand ones. A comfortable stool. A well-used basket. A favorite water jar. These objects quietly served families for many years. They became part of their stories. The wall should remember them too. The lamp keeper entered carrying a fresh bundle of linen wicks. He moved from lamp to lamp with calm confidence. Some flames needed only a little oil. Others needed a fresh wick. He worked so quietly that the painter barely noticed until the warm light suddenly became brighter. The colors upon the wall seemed to breathe once more. The blue of the river deepened. The golden wheat brightened softly. The red flowers became richer. The painter looked toward the lamp keeper. Thank you. The man smiled gently. I only help the colors. The painter answered, they help us all. Farther along the corridor, two laborers quietly swept limestone dust into small woven baskets. The dust collected every day. No matter how carefully everyone worked, tiny white particles always settled upon the floor. The sweeping itself became another peaceful rhythm. Long strokes. Gentle turns. No wasted movement. The apprentice watched them. They sweep every afternoon. They do. Tomorrow there will be dust again. There will. Then why sweep today? The master rested his brush. Because today deserves care. The apprentice looked thoughtful. He would remember that answer for many years. Outside the tomb, the sun had begun its slow descent toward the western desert. The cliffs glowed with warm amber light. Small desert birds flew low between scattered rocks before returning toward the green valley. The air had begun to cool. The evening breeze slowly gathered strength. Inside the mountain, however, the temperature hardly changed. The stone remembered the coolness of the night. The painter always appreciated that gift. He thought of the farmers working beneath the open sky. Their backs carried the heat of the afternoon. His own work remained sheltered by the mountain. Every trade offered different hardships. Every trade offered different comforts. He quietly gave thanks for both. The bakery scene continued to grow. Now he painted a family cat curled peacefully beside the warm oven. Its tail wrapped neatly around its paws. Its eyes were half closed. The apprentice laughed softly. There is always a cat. There usually is. They like warm places. So do people. The boy nodded. The painted cat somehow made the room feel even more welcoming. Nearby, the scribe stopped once again to study the growing work. His eyes immediately found the little animal. You remembered the cat? The painter smiled. My wife would have asked where it went. The scribe laughed quietly. My wife would too. For a few moments they simply stood looking at the peaceful bakery. The scribe finally said, "It feels like morning." The painter answered, "That is when bread belongs." The scribe rolled his papyrus and continued his slow walk through the chambers. The afternoon drifted gently onward. The painter added tiny cracks to the clay oven where years of heat had left their marks. He painted slight wear along the edge of the wooden paddle. The woven baskets gained loose strands here and there. Nothing looked new. Everything looked cared for. He believed there was beauty in objects that had served faithfully through many seasons. The apprentice quietly mixed fresh yellow pigment while humming almost too softly to hear. The tune had no words. It rose and faded like a light breeze crossing the river. No one asked him to stop. No one joined in. It simply became another gentle sound inside the workshop. The painter found himself smiling without realizing it. The chamber felt peaceful. The work felt steady. The day carried no urgency. Only quiet purpose. As the afternoon slowly leaned toward evening once more, the bakery wall became richer with every careful brush stroke. The painted oven seemed ready to warm another loaf of bread. The family cat rested forever beside the gentle heat. The baskets waited patiently upon the floor, and the quiet workers continued their timeless morning routine, preserved within cool limestone by the patient hands of craftsmen who believed that the simplest moments of ordinary life were worthy of lasting forever. Now the brushes have all been washed. The small bowls of color have been covered with smooth pieces of linen. The grinding stones rest quietly beside the shelves where they have rested after countless peaceful days. The last oil lamp burns with a calm, golden flame, its light growing softer as evening settles gently over the western cliffs. The painter stands for one final moment before the finished walls. He says nothing. There is nothing left to add. The vineyards are full. The gardens are still. The fishermen remain beside the quiet river. The bakers continue shaping warm loaves before dawn. The children carry little baskets with patient hands. The family cat sleeps forever beside the warm clay oven. Every ordinary moment has found its place. He slowly gathers his brushes into their woven basket. One by one, he checks each familiar tool with gentle hands. The smallest brush. The broad polishing brush. The smooth stone palette. The little linen cloth that has wiped away countless drops of color. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing is hurried. The apprentice quietly does the same. He smiles as he folds the last cloth. Months ago he needed constant reminders. Now his hands remember the routine on their own. The master notices but says nothing. Sometimes silence carries the warmest praise. The lamp keeper begins his evening walk through the chambers. One lamp after another, the little flames disappear. A gentle shadow settles across the painted walls. The bright blue water becomes softer. The green reeds fade into the growing darkness. The vineyards rest peacefully beneath the quiet night. The bakery glows for one last moment before its warm colors gently melt into shadow. Nothing truly disappears. The paintings simply go to sleep until morning. The craftsmen step slowly into the evening air. Above them, the sky has turned a deep shade of blue. The first stars appear quietly, one after another, just as they have for thousands of years above the Nile. The warm heat of the day slips away. A cool breeze wanders across the limestone cliffs, carrying the faint scent of river water, damp reeds, and distant fields ready for tomorrow's work. The painter begins the familiar walk home. His sandals press softly into the dusty path. Behind him, the mountain grows quiet once more. Ahead, tiny lights flicker inside the village. Families gather around simple evening meals. Fresh bread cools upon woven trays. Children grow sleepy after another long day beneath the Egyptian sun. Somewhere nearby, a mother hums a gentle song while rocking her child. An old fisherman carefully folds his net before resting beside his doorway. A farmer looks one last time across his peaceful fields. The potter covers his finished jars. The carpenter sets down his tools. The baker sweeps flour from the floor. The village settles into its familiar evening rhythm. The painter reaches his home. His youngest daughter runs to greet him. She notices another tiny streak of blue beneath one fingernail and smiles. "So the color stayed with you again?" He smiles back. "Just a little." She gently takes his hand. Together they step inside. The evening meal is simple. Warm bread. Lentils. A handful of dates. Cool water resting inside a clay jar that has waited patiently through the day. The family eats slowly. Their quiet conversation rises and falls like the calm waters of the Nile. No one speaks loudly. There is no need. Outside, the stars slowly fill the sky. The moon climbs gently above the palm trees. The river reflects silver light as it continues its endless journey through the fertile valley. A soft breeze moves through the reeds along the shore. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls once before silence returns. The painter climbs to the rooftop where woven reed mats have already been laid out for sleep. His family settles beside him. The mud brick walls below still hold a little warmth from the day, but the night air is cool and comforting. He looks toward the dark outline of the western hills. Beyond them, hidden inside the quiet mountain, the painted tomb rests peacefully. Its walls wait in complete stillness. The birds painted upon the plaster never grow old. The lotus flowers never close. The fishermen forever cast their nets upon calm waters. The vineyards remain forever ready for harvest. The warm bakery forever welcomes another peaceful morning. And the careful brush strokes of countless quiet craftsmen remain exactly where gentle hands placed them, preserving not great battles or loud triumphs, but something softer and perhaps even more lasting: the quiet beauty of ordinary life. As the night grows deeper, even these thoughts begin to drift away. The breeze becomes softer. The sounds of the village fade into silence. The stars continue their slow journey across the ancient Egyptian sky. The Nile flows gently through the darkness, just as it has for countless generations, carrying moonlight upon its calm surface. The oil lamps have gone out. The workshops are quiet. The tools are resting. The painter is asleep beneath the stars. And now, with the cool night surrounding the silent river, the whisper of reeds along the water, the warm memory of fresh bread, the gentle glow of forgotten lamps, and the timeless peace of ancient Egypt resting all around, the quiet world slowly fades into stillness, carrying you as softly as the Nile itself into a deep, peaceful, and comforting sleep.